One of the most effective English kings, Edward was also one of Scotland's greatest adversaries. King Edward I of England, the man styled Hammer of the Scots, irascible and mighty king who had ruled England with an iron fist since 1272, died on the 7th of July 1307 whilst on a military campaign to Scotland. His death had been long in the coming. His health had steadily deteriorated over the past 3 years. The exact nature of his illness is unknown, but it was painful and prolonged. Throughout 1306 and into the first half of 1307, the king's household was littered with the many purchases of foreign medicines, ointments and even leather leggings to help avert his stubborn illnesses. His legs were often treated, hence the leggings were made. His joints were apparently in pain. He took herbal baths and drank pomegranate wine. His critical health would go up and down. Some months he was carried in a litter, other months he was mobile and even able to attend the Parliament at Carlisle. As ever, the king held up to his ironclad legend. Despite the threat of imminent death, he refused in that indomitable way to die. Edward I, who became known as Longshanks due to his wars with the Scots and his height, was one of the greatest Plantagenet kings. He was born on the 17th of June 1239 at Westminster Palace, the first child of Henry III and Eleanor of Provence. His father named his heir Edward after his favourite Saint Edward the Confessor, who had been the King of England before the Norman conquest in 1066. He was a delicate child and suffered a life-threatening illness in 1246 but was nursed back to health by his mother. Intelligent and impatient, Edward proved to be a highly effective king. The reign of his father, Henry III, was characterized by internal instability and military failure. Upon succeeding to the throne on 1272, Edward did much to fix these issues. He managed to control and placate the unruly English barons and unite them behind him. The new Edward conquered Wales, came close to conquering Scotland and set the institution of Parliament firmly on track. To the vast majority of his English subjects, he was an excellent king because he kept good order and would not tolerate injustice. He also fathered about 17 children by his 2 wives. As he grew older, his temper grew more savage. His second wife, Margaret of France, had to try to protect the children from their father's anger. War dominated the twilight years of Edward's life. Throughout the first 7 years of the 14th century, the king struggled to gain control over a divided Scotland, declaring himself its king and reducing the country to a land rather than a kingdom, as noted in many legal documents from this period. In 1290, Edward was recognized as overlord of Scotland when he was called in to decide who should succeed to the vacant Scottish throne. He pronounced in favor of John Balliol, whom he treated as his puppet. When Balliol objected, Edward invaded Scotland in 1296, put Balliol in the Tower of London and put the Scots under English rule, but he faced one rebellion after another for the next 10 years. In 1306 Robert Bruce took up the cause of Scottish independence and was crowned King of Scots at Scone. When the news reached Edward, who was now in his middle 60s, he burst into a violent fury and resolved to finish matters with the Scots once and for all. His army was ordered to muster at Carlisle in July. Still vigorous in mind, the king's body was wearing out and he was not capable of riding. He was carried north by horse litter. He made his headquarters at Lanercost Priory, near Carlisle, while his armies ravaged Scotland and drove Bruce in flight. Edward was suffering badly from dysentery and his opponents were anticipating his end. The dying king decided to take some rest in his tent. Early the following day, his servants entered to wake the king up so that he could eat, and as they lifted him from his bed, he fell back in their arms dead. The leopard was no more. The king's body was sent to Waltham Abbey in Essex, where it laid in the state, whilst vigils were conducted and prayers said for the dead king's soul. By September preparations were made for Edward's funeral, and by mid-October the late king's body was moved from Waltham Abbey to the Monastery of Holy Trinity and other such places, and then eventually to St. Paul's. By the 26th of October, it was moved to Westminster Abbey for the funeral, which was conducted the following day. In a solemn ceremony the king was laid to rest wearing his coronation robes, which included a red silk tunic and cloth of gold lower garments, and a crown was placed on his head as was the tradition, along with spectres in his hands marking his royal office. He was then interred in a stark plain black Purbeck marble tomb. There was no ornate effigy placed on top of it, and possibly sometime in the 16th century, the words "Edward I, Hammer of the Scots is here" were added and can still be seen today. Why the tomb was so plain has been the subject of much conjecture. Some interesting theory suggests that Edward I himself had expressed a wish for his body to be boiled down and his bones to be taken on a return journey to the Holy Land on crusade, fulfilling a recent vow the king had made. Hence the tomb was kept plain and easily accessible in order to perform this task when the opportune moment came. Whilst we may never know for sure, we can be certain that the tomb reflected the personality of the man, unfussy, steely, and formidable. The tomb itself was eventually opened on the 2nd of May 1774 by a curious Dean of Westminster. The body was almost perfectly preserved with the dried skin still very visible, and the body measured at 6 foot 2 inches tall. The nickname Longshanks, therefore, is based on truth. He is, however, remembered as one of the strongest and most successful of the Plantagenet monarchs who ruled England during the medieval period, and his legacy still lives with us today.